This is Black Horse Pub. Well, good morning. Welcome back to Mirador Television. And it is time for the two Bs. And we have one with us. Good morning, Philip.
Yes, good morning, Keith and everybody. I fear that I'm going to have to fly solo this morning. Richard continues to be unwell himself. But sadly, yesterday, his wife, Becky, had to be taken to Worthing Hospital from court. And I have no update. So he did briefly ring me to ask to be stood down for today. We were going to do something a bit lighter than Monday's misery about the post office scandal. I had suggested to Richard, but it became academic, obviously, that we could talk about comedy and the comedy we like, because Richard is a mine of information on the Carry On films, and he is also a great favourite, a great fan, forgive me, of the late Barry Humphries. The latter I don't agree with him on, although Les Patterson was funny in that old-fashioned chauvinistic way. I was going to discuss my favourite people. I mean, Les Dawson, always, Morecambe and Wise, classics, Hale and Pace, Harry Enfield, and the like. But I can't fill an hour just about me, and it would be pretty boring anyway. We need the pair of us to bounce off each other, really. So I was at a bit of a loss, frankly, to know what to do today alone. But what I've decided to do is, well, let me put it this way. I have found that the older I get, the more books I am bought, because people, even my family, are at a loss to know what to buy an old codger like me. So they know I like reading, so it's invariably books. So I thought I would talk about books that I like and have been bought. Now, the first section, the first type of book I love are reference books. And the ones I particularly like are, for example, this book, which is Red Herrings and White Elephants. And it's an explanation of the origins of all the phrases we use in modern life, because many of them go back, hundreds of years. But the one that amused me, because not only am I a great cricket fan, but I'm also not a fan of, but a devotee of the First World War. I found Barmy Army. Now, Barmy Army in modern terminology is used to describe the fans who go abroad and support the England cricket team. They are known as the Barmy Army, and they chant, "We are the Barmy Army." And they're well known for drinking huge amounts, particularly in Australia, and giving opposition players a really hard time. So this book acknowledges that, but it gives the history balm is the froth produced by fermenting alcohol. And in English prisons, inmates used to feign madness by what was called putting on the balmy stick, in other words, frothing at the mouth. In 1912, Fred Murray wrote and published a popular song which includes the lines, "Ginger, you're balmy, why don't you join the army?" This became a popular limerick during the First World War, when the lines, "You'll get knocked out by a bottle of stout, ginger, you're balmy," were added. And then it goes on to explain that in 1994, the Australians and the cricket commentators used the term to describe the cricket followers. Another one I like is a classical education, which I never did the classics either at school or at university, although my wife did. And so this looks into classical literature, it looks into the gods, you learn the Greek alphabet, you learn both about Greek and Roman mythology, and it really is, well, it's normally I keep it, is your volume gone? You're on mute.
For some reason, but now I'm all right. I can hear you all right. You've been broadcasting loud and clear.
Yes, well, it's the sort of book you can put by the loo, frankly. I know it's rather unhygienic, but because you can dip in and out of them. Another one I've mentioned before is a series of books, rather macabre, but fascinating in itself, The Hangman's Record. There are 3 volumes, and it traces actual executions, including those in Lewes Prison, public and private, going back hundreds of years. This is the final volume, and it comes up to 1964, which is when the last hanging took place in Britain. So that's another interesting, to me anyway. And the one I got for Christmas from my wife is really good. I don't know if you or the viewers watch an excellent program called Countdown. Countdown is, I think, still on Channel 4, and it's basically 2 contestants in front of an audience doing various.
Very long running program.
Oh, very long running, yes. Well, there is Dictionary Corner. And in Dictionary Corner is the ever-present Susie Dent, the not unattractive brunette who always has a guest with her. And she does the word puzzles with the contestants. And then also, because of her etymological knowledge, she then finds more words using the number of letters and the letters that have been selected at random. And this is interesting stories about curious words. And one I find fascinating, she goes into collective nouns. So the collective noun for a group of monks is an abomination of monks. If you see a bunch of rhinos, that's known as a crash of rhinoceri. Peddlers, don't see them much on the streets anymore, but peddlers are an impertinence of peddlers. Painters, a collective noun for painters is a misbelief of painters. And explained by this, a misbelief of painters, she says, reflects the fact that the portrait artist's job was to flatter their subject, to suspend disbelief, if you like, in those who viewed his work. Now, you'll probably know this one, Keith, a murmuration of starlings. Hello.
A murderation.
A murmuration of starlings. Well, certainly here, if not in Lewes, at certain times of the day, we have visible murmurations of starlings. And it's rather like a school of fish in the water who are all together and they move together, but it's in the air and it's starlings, and it's the most incredible thing to see. Where they all come from, Jackie and I wonder about, because there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and then they just disappear.
And how they coordinate their flight as well.
Yes, there must be a reason for it. There's a reason for everything in life, including the animal world. So now I mentioned monks, a collection of nuns. It's not a nunnery; it's a superfluity of nuns, because the nunneries were incredibly crowded in the Middle Ages, because the nunneries were used for the unmarried daughters, or those the nobility thought were unable to get married, and they were crammed into the nunneries. And then, of course, Henry VIII dissolved not only the monasteries, but he dissolved the nunneries, so the nuns had nowhere to go. So Susie Dent wonders whether that could explain the word. Ravens, as in the Tower of London, the collective noun for them is an unkindness, because they were deemed to be very unkind to their young. And then writers, the collective noun for writers is a worship of writers. They were bound to worship their patrons. So, for example, Geoffrey Chaucer, his patron was Henry IV, and he was sort of bound to the king. Reference books. Now, this is a bit of
before we go any further,
my...
and I forget to return. Do you know your first book was cricket? Do you know when the first women's cricket match took place?
Women's cricket? No, I don't.
Yeah. Well, I was doing a bit of research on the local cricket scene, and Sussex Cricket Club, as a club, is the oldest in the world. But going back, Lord Gage in 1600 was known to play on the dripping pan, which is now a football ground in Lewes. But I accidentally came across the fact that the first recorded cricket match between women was in something like 1610 or 1615.
Goodness me.
Yeah, it was quite.
Your volume keeps going. There we are. I mean, just going to...
I know for some reason this keeps on clicking off. I have to keep on clicking my microphone, and I don't know why.
Well, your image
as
is
you know, everything's up to speed at the moment.
your visual image is breaking up. I don't know whether there's a problem with the Wi-Fi at your end.
It may be.
You're freezing on me, and then that volume goes. Maybe it's the signal. I don't know.
Let's see. Well, it's connected to.
It's very annoying for you because the volume keeps clicking off.
It is off. Now it's on.
Yes.
Why keeps on clicking off? How about the picture now? Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll have to go with that for the moment. I've checked the internet and it seems to be on. I rather suspect that I've got to reinstall this whole piece of software. It seems to be creaking at the edges.
Are you using your own computer again, or are you using the refurb?
Yes. No, I'm using my own computer again.
Right. Yes, you mentioned women's
The
cricket.
one that we've always used.
Yes. Because in the First World War, the most popular form of football, because all the men were fighting or disabled or whatever, was female football. I mean, they talk about the huge crowds they're getting now for female football, but particularly in the Midlands and the North, in World War One, the stadia were packed to watch women play football.
Now they've made a movie about baseball, women's baseball. Have they made a movie about women's football in the?
No, they've made a few movies
First
about
World War?
men's football. As you asked me, Keith, I think it's only a matter of time before a movie is a film, as I prefer to call them, is made about. You know, I think the problem with it is they could make a film easily about what happened before the men came back from war, with the teams playing, women's teams playing each other to entertain those at home. They could do that, rather like they did with that film I mentioned, The Keeper, which is about Bert Troutman,
Yes.
who was a German soldier, prisoner of war, kept in England, who ended up playing for Manchester City and had his neck broken in a cup final and played on. But I think women's football in its current state is still too young to have particular heroes. So, in my opinion, they would struggle to make a film of interest. But then again, I may be completely wrong. You know, women and men following women's football may be gagging for a film, and there may be many heroes or heroines. I don't know.
Well, I think that sport can provide very interesting topics. I mentioned to you before, and I think that you said that you hadn't seen it, is the Dennis Waterman film about the First World Cup. There are only 3 nations that took part.
But in fact, I've forgotten to look that up.
Story is absolutely fascinating. Essentially, we were represented by Woolwich Arsenal Football Club, except it wasn't Woolwich Arsenal, it was West Auckland, a little mining town in the north. And the English establishment didn't want to know when the Europeans, the Italians and the Spanish decided to mount a World Cup. And Sir Thomas Lipton, for some reason, got involved, and he remembered getting a letter from a little boy thanking him for tea that he'd given for one of the Jubilees. And so he wrote to this village team, not offering any money at all, but said, would they like to take part in the World Cup? And they jumped at the chance, and off they went, and they won it. And 4 years later, they won it again. And there's the wonderful last line of the movie is that the father, the mining father, is showing it to his son, and it says on it to be kept in perpetuity, which apparently it is. It's still in the West Auckland Football Club trophy cabinet. And the little boy says, "What does perpetuity mean, Dad?" And he says, "Forever, lad, forever." A wonderful line to end the movie. But they made it an interesting film, even though it's something which doesn't occasion very often a mention at all. I mean, I would love to see it mentioned more. And I am told, on good authority, by a sports reporter in Northern Ireland, that one of the Northern Irish teams actually won the European Cup as well in those very early days, way back in the 1920s. So there is plenty of interest, I think, if somebody. I mean, I may start to research a bit of it myself now that you've told me about the ladies' teams in the Second World War. I think it'd be fascinating.
Well, I am confident that I have seen moving footage of women's football in the Northeast. One of the teams wearing a Newcastle United type strip, playing each other at a football ground with a big crowd, and that's on YouTube somewhere. I know I've seen that footage.
Well, I'm going to research that because I think it would be a nice thing for us. And although we couldn't make a movie, we could do a nice little 10-minute documentary with still pictures.
Of course, yeah.
There are plenty of pictures in the newspapers and so on.
No,
interesting
absolutely.
To see what's extant.
Anyway, 2 books edited by Jonathan Agnew, who is the doyen of Test Match Special on Radio 5. This is anecdotes, tall tales, with Phil Tufnell, the ex-England spin bowler, Middlesex spin bowler,
Right.
who is one of the commentators on Test Match Special. And one I've already mentioned to the viewer is The Wit of Cricket, the second innings, again, not written by Agnew, but these are anecdotes, stories from cricketers, from commentators. And again, you can just dip in and out. They're like short stories, which is very good. And it's written by, you probably can't see this, but on the back, there is a cartoon of Brian Johnson, now no longer with us, and a very young Jonathan Agnew, who was then a novice and the youngest part of the team. Now, the book is written by Barry Johnston, who is Brian Johnston's son, and who himself is now in his 70s, which rather ages all of us. But now, history. My daughter bought me this, London in the 17th Century, the making of the world's greatest city. Now, I haven't finished this yet. I have to confess, it's rather small writing, rather small print, which my increasingly knackered eyes struggle with. But chapter by chapter, it traces from how small London was to what it is today. And it identifies the 17th century as the big one. The one, of course, there was the plague, there was the fire of London, and so on. So that's another type of book I like. And on the same note, the older of my sons is in a very serious relationship with currently his girlfriend. I won't tempt fate by saying anything more, but her father is a chap called David Fathers, and he lives in London, and he's also a superb illustrator. So he's written a series of 4 books about various aspects of London. This is my favourite because I'm a rather macabre type. And this is Bloody London. And he goes through each district of London and looks at literally the bloody history murders, executions, you name it, of that area of London, both going back to medieval times and until the present day. And again, it's in little sections, so you can dip into each one, dip out, and it's very informative, and you get these wonderful illustrations that he does within the book to go with the narrative. And he's done 4 of them. Now, one that we did have, but I think my wife gave away as a present, sadly, was London's Hidden Rivers, which I found very fascinating because there are so many rivers that people haven't even heard of under the streets of London. The obvious one that we all see is the Thames. But you will know, because of your journalistic history, and because I was there as a barrister, that Fleet Street is called Fleet Street because the River Fleet runs underneath it. And the River Fleet eventually was used more as a sewer before the Victorians installed proper sewage. And there are many other rivers and big streams. And again, he covers all of that, including some of the canals, like in Little Venice, which is a hub of canal boats and barges, hence the name. He then did this, the London Thames Path. It's a 40-mile walk that you can do. And it goes from the City of London out to the Thames Barrier. Again, area by area, bridge by bridge, there's a narrative and an illustration. Like even on the back there, you've got the old Crystal Palace, churches. So even the covers of these books are, to me, visually very, very interesting. And then his latest one is Diverse London. And this traces the diversity in terms of ethnicity and culture in London going back hundreds of years. So you can see on the front there, you've got Trevor McDonald, immortalised by Lenny Henry as Trevor McDonald. You've got Sadiq Khan, you've got the statue of Gandhi, and then on the back, you have even more interesting, you've got Trotsky, you've got Diane Abbott, you've got George Bernard Shaw there at the bottom, and so on. So that's Diverse London. And again, he traces it through each area of London. And this one, which he gave us as a gift, he's actually signed. That's his signature. So that's a much treasured item. And they're not particularly expensive. They're extremely pleasant and informative to read. And they are available, well, everywhere, but I buy them from Amazon. Although currently, to my knowledge, there's no more than those 4. So they are the reference books. How about you, Keith?
But it's nice little snippets of knowledge.
Could you say that again?
Just some of your books. One of the things that I was going to ask you is, in London in the 17th century, and you say that London was quite small then, but I taught for a year at a college at Notting Hill, and I was instigated a student newspaper there, and we did little bits and pieces on history. And Notting Hill was full of oak trees, and had pigs and hogs roaming there, rooting up the acorns and eating them. And it was one great big pig farm. Before the road, I forget which road it was now, led out of town and into the rest of the country. But along the route of undergrounds there, of course, you've got things like Baron's Court and names of that sort, where the barons, the wealthy people, actually got out of London and built their villas along the Thames. And I was going to ask, did your 17th century book mention the expansion of the wealthy outside the city?
Yes, very much so. But like I say, I haven't really got very far into it. I dip in and out. Let me just see. I mean, I know Baron's Court because there's a tube station there.
Yes, that's right.
It's at least the Piccadilly line, if not the District line as well, and it's near where my daughter lives. She lives equidistant between Olympia and Baron's Court Tube, and that's the tube I would get out from to go and visit her.
Right, and that actually was named after a baron's court.
Yes, well, sadly, there's no
welfare.
specific mention of this. I mean, on a similar subject, and again, this comes from bloody London. Public executions would take place at a place called Tyburn.
Yes.
Now, Tyburn is where the Marble Arch stands. So that's the London we know. But Tyburn as an execution place was in the middle of the countryside in the days when it was used to execute people. And the execution.
Well, Tyburn would have existed before Buckingham Palace, I assume.
Yes. Yes. For many centuries, it was used as a place of execution. But it was literally in the middle of the countryside because two reasons. The authorities didn't want the grisly sight to be in the middle of the then city of London, and they didn't have the room. And large crowds would gather to watch the execution of infamous criminals. And in the end, the book tells me, they built, let me see if there's a picture of it. They built a special set of gallows. Just trying to find it, which was triangular, because the original Tyburn was chosen because there were two huge elm trees with long, massive branches, and originally they were used to hang people, because in those days people weren't hanged as they were until we stopped hanging today, when it was skilled executioners like Albert Pierpoint who could get you from the condemned cell to death in about 9 seconds using the drop method, which is calculated on the height and weight of the victim, and with a special noose whereby underneath the right chin the right chin jaw here, the drop would fall in a certain way, and given a clean drop, the head would be pushed in such a way, and the force of the knot broke the back, broke the neck, which was believed to at least render the person unconscious, if not immediately dead. Far from that, in the Tyburn days, they would make somebody climb a ladder. There'd be a very short piece of rope with no special knot, and they were either told to jump off the ladder themselves, or if they wouldn't, and I'm sure many didn't, they'd just be chucked off. And so the spectacle for the macabre crowds, and I'm talking thousands of people, I'm talking 20, 30, 40,000 people. Landowners nearby would build grandstands for these people to watch the poor buggers being hanged, because it wasn't quick. The poor devils strangled to death. Their necks weren't broken, it was strangulation. And also the hanged men, the executions themselves, were very, very ham-fisted and really rather cruel. But I'm trying to find the picture of what they eventually used. It's like a triangle with 3 sides, inevitably, and they could hang up to 8 people at a time. Sorry about this, hang on.
No, I think this is interesting.
What the one thing that is annoying about Davy's books is the pages are so full of information and drawings that you can't actually find the page numbers. But believe me, it's here somewhere, because I saw it only this morning. I mean, on a similar subject, they then started to use Newgate Prison. Newgate Prison, a sketch of which is there, showing a scaffold, public executions outside the prison, big crowds. Newgate Prison was where the Old Bailey is now. The Old Bailey didn't exist until Newgate was demolished in the 19th century, and the Bailey was built on the site of Newgate. Now, in the basement of the Old Bailey today, because I've used it and gone through it, is the old door of Newgate Prison. It's excuse me a minute. People ringing me. And it's this big heavy door, and to this day it's got the marks of the boots and hands of prisoners who were trying to get out. And that's the entrance to the Old Bailey cells. That's the first door they open if you're going to go downstairs and see your client. So that's Newgate. When would it be? I think it's Great Expectations. The film Great Expectations, and the hero of the story goes to a lawyer to do with his inheritance, and on the wall of the lawyer's office were what they called death masks, and he had these death masks made for a fee of executed people. And then the camera pans from the wall to outside the window, and his window is overlooking Newgate Prison. And it actually shows, but from a distance, it shows a mass public hanging of men, women, and children. I mean, they hanged children. You know, if you were a pickpocket in those days, in the, you know, Fagin type days, you were hanged, even as a kid. So they were pretty brutal times. This is getting to annoy me now. God damn. Yeah, in 1807, 2 men were to be hanged for the murder of a John Steele. 40,000 people crowded into the streets around Newgate to witness the execution. 40,000.
It was a day out, wasn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, it was a spectacle, gruesome though it was, and there would be food sellers, drink sellers. It was a carnival atmosphere, apparently. I just can't believe it, but
I'm sure that somebody as knowledgeable as you knows that gala is a word that comes from gallows day.
Say that again.
The word gala comes from gallows day. On a day of hanging, which was the day when everybody went and had picnics and gathered to watch an execution.
I didn't know that.
Was known as
No,
gallows day, and the modern word gala comes from it. Yeah.
No, this is very, very bad television, I know, but I'm determined to find this damn illustration. There we are. Right. You see?
Oh yeah, huge crowd.
But if you look at the triangular scaffold, you can see the number of people they hanged at once.
Oh yes, indeed, mass hanging.
And then they developed.
The last woman hanged in public in Lewis had about 4,000 people turn up to see her.
Yes, I remember you telling me that.
Yes, I've forgotten, but I know it as the onion pie murder. She poisoned her husband with arsenic on Christmas Day in 18 something on the basis that she fancied the lodger, and it turned out that the lodger didn't fancy her, so she killed her husband for no good reason. But what seemed to be a very emotional reason for the crime is apparently the priest who spent some time with her before she went to her death said she did it very, very calmly and more or less said, you know, I deserved it, and she walked out and she was hanged without any great fuss. When they go to be executions.
Well,
the chap I felt sorry for was there was a chap from Bishopston, and he had tried his hand at farming and didn't make enough money, and tried his hand at fishing and didn't make enough money, but he popped into Eastbourne one day, and in those days it was a bit of a trek, not the way it is today, just one stop on the train. And on the way back, he he bumped into some people that he'd been chatting with at a bar, and they'd got horses, and he asked if he could get a ride with them back to Bishopston, and they turned out to be part of the Hawkhurst gang, and he was accosted by revenue officers and arrested and taken as part of the gang, and he was actually hanged at Tyburn, even though there was little evidence to suggest that he was guilty. And he, as you described, got a fair old crowd to watch him, and was I don't know whether he was dropped with others or whether he was done on his own, but he was one of the people that I really, in reading about him, felt very sorry for him, and in fact, I think that some of the court or prison officials had begged for clemency for him because he's such a quiet, nice, unassuming bloke.
Yeah, it's very sad. I mean, can you remember his name?
No, I can't offhand, but I shall look it up because I did write a little article about him, and it's somewhere tucked away in my computer.
Well, on the similar vein, in a similar vein to the onion pie lady, taking it all very calmly and everything, Albert Pierpoint, who hanged many, many, many people, said the bravest person he'd ever hanged was Ruth Ellis.
Was?
Ruth Ellis.
Ah, right, yes. The last lady to be hanged in Britain.
Yeah. He always said that. Yeah. But
describe that case, because a lot of people will not be familiar with Ruth Ellis. I lived through her. I mean, I can remember, everybody waiting to receive word that she'd been hanged. But she was a very unfortunate lady, wasn't she?
Well, she was. The person she killed by shooting him a number of times in an area of London called Hampstead was a man called David Blakely. David Blakely, she was absolutely obsessed with. He was not as obsessed at all with her and used her as a sexual convenience more than anything. She was a club hostess, which in the 50s through to the 60s for a female was deemed undesirable. She wasn't a prostitute. She wasn't an escort. She just ran a nightclub. She was a very brassy, platinum blonde, heavily made up, snappy dressy type of woman. And like I say, became infatuated with David Blakely. Well, David Blakely treated her appallingly. Now, Ellis had a friend whose name I've forgotten, a male friend who he himself was obsessed with her, but she did not return the favour. But this friend would drive her around in his car, Jaguar, whenever she wanted. Well, she had discovered that Blakely had been having an affair with another woman and was currently at his country home with all his posh mates. So she got this chap to drive her to this pub where she knew he would be. And again, he treated her appallingly and basically got her thrown out of the pub. So she was at the end of her mental and romantic tether. There is a film, which is one of my favourites about all this, called Dance with a Stranger, where Miranda Richardson plays Ellis. Rupert Everett plays Blakely, and Ian Holm plays the chap whose name I can't remember. And it traces her story up until the condemned cell door is open. She was doubly unlucky because her trial was something of a farce, because as we've discussed on this programme before, in those days, you could only get a manslaughter verdict if you were deemed insane. There was no diminished responsibility, there was no law of provocation, and she basically fired 4 or 5 bullets from a loaded gun into his body quite deliberately. And in the end, the way she gave her evidence, which was apparently very cold and clinical, the fact that she was in the witness box as if she were in the club, so all dolled up and whatever, was held against prejudice. And she admitted that she wanted to kill him. So the judge had to direct the jury that she had no defence. He had no alternative. She didn't have a defence because of her own admissions. And so she was convicted of murder. There was just nothing in the law then. The only thing she could hope for was the Home Secretary, as an act of clemency, commuting it to life imprisonment. Well, he didn't do that. And it's believed because of her lifestyle, her gender, and the fact that she admitted she wanted to kill Blakely and did so. And so she was hanged. So the outcry was a combination of, we're actually sick of all these hangings, and that it was felt she was very unkindly treated, but to no avail, and she was hanged. But like I say, Dance with a Stranger is a really compelling film,
Philip, is there any evidence, any real evidence of who was the first person to be hanged in Britain?
I would need to go back to the first volume of the Hangman's Record. I don't think Steve Fielding, who authors these books, goes back that far. I mean, people have been hanged in all countries, unofficially or officially, for years. You know, heaven knows. But when the first judicially authorized hanging was, I will have to find out for you. I couldn't say. But they were stringing people up in the middle 80s after battles and whatever.
Yes.
You know,
there is some evidence that there is a hanging site in Lewes that goes back to Saxon times.
I'm sure
that the Normans took it over and continued to use it.
Yeah, I'm sure that's right. Well, Keith, I've rather run out of steam, I'm afraid.
Well, we've got an hour, and some interesting stuff come out of that. But thank you, Philip, for holding the fort yourself. I hope that our colleague and friend Richard is not too poorly, that he will recover, that his wife will recover, and that they'll be back to being a very normal, happy family. Because I think that you and I can tell viewers Richard is a very nice man to know. His family is a very nice family to know, indeed as Philip is himself. And that we feel very comfortable with one another and enjoy one another outside this program or these programs, as well as inside them. And it's sort of like a limb missing with him not being around. So let's hope
it is. I mean, an example of is with you. You went down the Black Horse on his birthday just to wish him happy birthday, and I knew they were having a family meal, and Rebecca, his wife, just asked you to join them, didn't she?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and it was a lovely occasion. We've got a delivery, so we're coming to an end just at the right time. But yes, indeed,
Right.
a very, very generous family. So
Right. Well,
we'll talk to you on Monday morning, if not before.
yes, you will. I'm okay for Monday. I'm okay for Wednesday with Prideaux, but I've got the dentist the week today.
Okay. All right.
So as I told you before, I cannot do a week today.
Right. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. There we go. That's. I'm just going to end the session now and let the gentleman in.